better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't go.
God's balls! When one faces two ghouls. Waste no time wishing for fewer, Rob.
Waste no time. This is an eminently quotable book. Hello, everyone. This is Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
And I'm Dungeon Master Rob. And in case it's not clear, you have wandered into the next edition of the Dungeon Masters
Book Club.
And we're talking about Throne of the Crescent Moon by Saladin Ahmed.
Yes, this is a book from a couple of years ago, I think 2012. It's been out there, and it's our first book from the Dungeon Master Book Club that is actually in the Dungeon Master's Guide appendix.
Oh, that's right.
Of the new edition of D&D.
Yeah, that's right. It's in, when I read this, it had not, it was not in the...
Wasn't published yet.
It has since become, part of, I don't know if I would call this like part of the canon, but Saladin Ahmed is well known among the Dungeons and Dragons community. He is a D&D player himself, an enthusiast, a great tweeter. Now he spends most of his time, I believe, working on comics for Marvel. Doing
more profitable and prestigious things than writing basically pure fantasy of a type that we, don't often get.
This is a terrific book, and in a just world, Saladin Ahmed would be showered with accolades and wealth, but we don't live in a just world. I think it did moderately well, but I don't know that this is a massive earner. I don't know.
It wasn't pulling Game of Thrones numbers, right?
No, it was not. It wasn't even pulling Chuck Wendig numbers, which is a real shame for lots of reasons.
So if you're unfamiliar with this book and you didn't, take our instructions to read it before this episode came out, that's fine. We're, one of the reasons we have Dungeon Masters Book Club is, to go back to the well of good fiction that we can use for inspiration for our games and for our players.
We'll keep this mostly spoiler free and talk about like what we liked, what you can take away from it, and I guess why we like this as sort of inspiration, right? So even if you haven't read it, I think you'll probably find this useful. I also, before we begin, you should read it. I think you can get it for $5 on Amazon as an ebook. It's short. Which is so rare in the fantasy genre, and it's good. It's a great book. It'll take you an afternoon to read.
And in a turn away from our previous entries in the Dungeon Masters Book Club, the Traitor Baru Cormorant and Black Leopard Red Wolf. Right, it is a little bit lighter in tone,
yes.
Right? Not that there's not darkness here.
There's some grim and violent bits, but you will not feel sad, probably, at the end of this book.
Yeah.
You will
feel feelings, but not only overwhelming sadness.
That's right. Again, not too many spoilers, but if you're looking for a beach read or a summer read, something that isn't going to make you feel awful, this is much better than our previous book club.
In the name of God, after reading this book, you will want to buckle some swash, right?
You will. You want to.
There's action. There's fun.
You want a sword, some sorcery. You will want to. You'll want to do some adventuring. I think that's maybe like the coolest or maybe the best recommendation is this. Just it sparks your thrill of adventure. It's just a terrific adventure story, Throne of the Crescent Moon is.
And before we get into more about it, its world building, its characters and stuff, I think we have to say, or at least I have to say, even better than a book that was specifically kind of made for D&D, like Dragonlance or something like that,
or any
Throne
of the
Crescent
Drizzt novels,
any of the officially licensed book. No book captures the specific feel of the D&D rule set without being dumb or boring.
Yes,
than this book. You will never find a more realized actualization in novel form of people playing D&D.
Yes. This is. I have said this at the very beginning. This is the perfect platonic ideal of a book that is clearly somebody's D&D campaign made into a narrative. But the thing is, it's good. It's not like clunky. It's not boring. It doesn't feel like shoehorned. But it is obvious that these are heavily inspired by D&D characters playing in a Dungeons and Dragons fantasy setting. And
so that makes me... Go ahead, sorry.
There's a lot of books in this genre that we've talked about, and you'll notice that Matt and I don't bring up Dragonlance very often, or don't bring up, the Drizzt novels, which I have read, and they're not awful, but like, you can tell you're reading a D&D. It has a certain stiffness and structure to it that isn't delightful. But Throne of the Crescent Moon is it's perfect encapsulation of how D&D might be if you were trying to make it into a good story.
Exactly. And I think that's a good segue into talking about our author. Saladin Ahmed is, as we said, a very successful author and comic books writer, and he has spoken a lot about Dungeons and Dragons being an influence on him at reading. He has said, I think in some interviews, that reading the D&D manuals, like when he was a kid and a teenager, like taught him to read. And while he didn't have the opportunity to play a lot as a kid, creating characters and building worlds using Dungeons and Dragons was like what taught him to read, appreciate fantasy, appreciate literature. I think in one interview he described, he grew up in Dearborn, Michigan, which is a center of the Arab American community in the United States. And he talks about, hearing, the call to prayer out of his window while reading Lord of the Rings. And, I guess we can get into this a little bit, as much as two non-Muslim guys can, but there's obviously a lot of response to traditional fantasy literature here from Ahmed.
Right. So in case it's not obvious by the title and what we said so far, Throne of the Crescent Moon is unapologetically set in a medieval or ancient Arabic Middle Eastern setting, right? The city at the center of it is Dam Sawat. It's a Baghdad, it's a
Cairo, it's a Istanbul. I mean, I think most heavily Baghdad. I think it's definitely medieval Cairo feels close to me.
I think it's supposed to be something like Baghdad, center of a distinctly Arab setting. It's also, so it's a response to traditional D&D, but it's clearly inspired by Arabian Nights, 1001 Tales, Sinbad.
The sequel, which we might not get, is entitled The 1001, of course, referring to the traitorous angels. But
right. And of course, there's a sort of like unnamed monotheistic deity and heavenly scriptures. What do they call it? There's scriptures.
The heavenly chapters.
Chapters. That's right. Yeah. So I'll tell you what I like about this, and as I was reading some reviews, I found that not everybody did. But Saladin
they're wrong.
They're wrong. He has not tried to reinvent the wheel, and I think that's great. He is playing on tropes, and he is conjuring the familiar, but he does it in such a magnificent way, I think, that it doesn't feel cheap or tacky or boring, and it's I think it's what makes this such a terrific read. And I found that a lot of people didn't like that. They were looking for something else, but I think it's terrific. I think it makes this a great book. So you know what you're getting into the second that you start reading about your main character and Dam Sawat and all of the surrounding areas, and you fall into a very exciting and interesting and rich fantasy world that is not your standard fantasy fare. It's and
I think what we get, the end result is an unabashedly Muslim fantasy book and world and adventure that, like we said, again, the best fiction you will ever find that is an adaptation of D&D mechanics in the real world. We'll get to it when we talk about the world building and the characters, but it is also unabashedly Muslim, and that is great. And for so now you have 2 reasons that you have to read this book if you're wishing to, in a good way, include some of those ideas in your world building as a dungeon master, but also like see how a story based on D&D mechanics turns out.
Yeah, and that's I think what makes this so great. Like, this is not the only book that approaches fantasy from trying to present a Muslim or Islamic inspired fantasy. Lions of Al Rasad by Guy Gabriel Kay is a very, very good faux Andalusia setting, but Throne of the Crescent Moon is just so fun and so very clearly D&D, which is what makes this a great intersection and a great place for a dungeon master to draw inspiration from. Yep, Matt mentioned the long delayed sequel, the 1001 or the 1001 Names or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
So we should be clear that, in my opinion, we'll never see it. But that's
okay.
Throne of the Crescent Moon, unlike many of the other
any other fantasy novel ever written,
is a very comfortable standalone. You want to read more about the Doctor and about Rasad and Ursid and all these characters, but it has a clear endpoint. It is okay if we never get the sequel. So don't let that turn you off from reading this.
And I think one final thing we should point out about the author is that Saladin Ahmed has been sort of a great voice in the science fiction, fantasy, and D&D communities for a number of years, and he's also been very open about his own struggles with depression and mental health, and that is super great to see. And but we're not going to get a sequel, and do not at him asking for a sequel.
Yes.
Don't be a jerk.
Yes. Don't be a jerk. It's, and that's why I'm comfortable recommending this, is because it stands alone just fine. I would love a sequel. Probably won't happen. That's okay. This is a great book, and it's got a lot to recommend it. So let's get into specifics.
The plot.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you getting without too much spoilers? I'm not going to do some sort of timer, but let's see if you can keep me on track, Rob, as I quickly give you the best synopsis I can. In the Crescent Moon kingdoms, in the Empire Kingdom of Abyssine, in the great city of Dam Sawat, there is a ghoul hunter, the last ghoul hunter, played by Vin Diesel. No, he's not played by Vin Diesel. He's played by an old, fat, bearded man who just wants to retire, named Dr. Abdullah Makslood, and his assistant, Rasid Bas Rasid. They are ghoul hunters. A ghoul murders someone, and they have to track down the ghoul creator. They end up teaming up with a nomadic barbarian who can turn into a lion, Zamia, and Dr. Abdullah Makslood's old friends from back in town, the Magus Dawood and his wife, the alchemist Litas, as the city heads into open rebellion. There's politics, and they try and hunt the Ghoul of Ghouls and an evil jackal demon back in the city of Dam Sawat. Everything comes to a head as the characters explore the city and the palace. So there's big fights, lots of action, and yeah, without any spoilers, that's the plot.
It's a great plot. What I like about Throne of the Crescent Moon, and I hope you got this from Matt's plot description, is that it's snappy. There's a couple of off chapters in the middle where but it
feels like a party being like, I'm not sure what we need to do next. It doesn't, but it also feels very natural. They're like, well, I guess I'll go talk to my contacts.
It doesn't
I
bother
don't know.
me.
I need some spell components.
Yeah. But aside from a couple of, I don't know, filler chapters, bottle episodes in the middle, it's very snappy. It progresses very linearly and logically in a way that's good. I don't mean that in a boring sense. You're like, oh, we fight the ghouls. Shoot, I can't track the ghouls with my magic anymore. I've got a knife. I've got to go, create a tracking spell to find the ghoul's master. Got to go to the palace. I like the pacing a lot. I think that it never really lets up. And it's a great example of like a well-told adventure story. And if you wanted to like sort of model your adventures and adventure hooks off of it, you could do far worse. It's a great way to like sort of demonstrate, okay, this is how the players might get from one step to another, and it feels like an adventure. Feels like a D&D adventure.
Yeah, if the last book we read, if Black Leopard Red Wolf left you feeling that pace and time do not exist, this will be a refreshing change in that it really does feel like after I, read a chapter of this book, I feel inspired to like, plot out the next couple possible nodes in my adventure as slower, fast things that connect to each other.
Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of action in this book. There's a substantial number of fights with ghouls and other monsters, but it never feels unnecessary or boring. They're exactly as long or short as they need to be, and they come at extremely appropriate times. This is a good lesson, I think, for dungeon masters. Too much combat feels boring and tedious. Too little feels too little, and you lose the tension. Thor of the Crescent Moon does a great job of throwing in combat, also some street chases and politics and other good like snappy action moments to keep things moving. I think it's very well done in this respect.
Yeah. And, it's got a fairly standard kind of 3-act structure that I think is a good model for a lot of scenario-type adventures, and that you sort of have an initial act of, here's this new challenge, a longer second act of players exploring details about the world, punctuated by a few action sequences, and a clear final conclusion of okay, yeah, let's head to the big boss place.
Yeah, I also like many. This is a big problem with Dungeons and Dragons adventures, many books too, but there's a clear path, sort of like a faux ladder from the ghouls that the mooks that the Doctor and Rashid are sent out to go fight at the beginning, all the way up to the big bad, right? There's a clear chain of command, right? You can see how one progresses to the other. So there's a cohesion to the book and to the adventure, which I think is very well done. Sometimes this connection is not well explained, and again, this is another thing that I really like about Thor of the Crescent Moon, is that you can everything flows from your first, fighting baddies in the desert all the way up to your, climactic battle in the palace.
But as I think the book demonstrates, right, not every challenge or combat always has to relate to the main plot. For example, some of the characters are jumped by some assholes called the Young Scholars, right? Do they have anything to do with the plot or the big bad? Probably not. Do they make the city of Dom Sawat feel lived in and full of factions? Absolutely.
And this is a good lesson. You should include these things in your writing and your games. Too much and it's distracting, too little and it feels like your adventure's on rails. So make sure you throw in some things that are not necessarily directly related to the big bad, so that you remind your players that they are in a living, breathing world and not a movie. Okay,
Rob, choose your poison. Should we go into some characters or the broader world building of this book next?
It is all I can do to not talk about characters already. So let's talk about characters. So you just got to know, folks, the best thing about this book is the characters. So even if you're not a DM, I would read this as a player if you're looking for inspiration to come up with interesting and unique backstories, characters, ideas. I love all of the characters. They're they're wonderful.
Yeah, these the basically the main 5 or I guess 6 characters here are basically all of them would be like just a crowning achievement if you had a character set up with these motivations and goals and backstories at your table. They are great.
So there's sort of like a core adventuring party of 3, right? You've got the doctor, Dr.
Abdullah Maksud.
Abdul. Watch us mangle these only slightly not Western names.
You can call him Dooley if you want.
Dooley.
Some people do.
There is Rashid, the dervish, and there is
Zamia,
who is a
Badawi.
A Badawi tribes person who can transform into a lion. And then there's a few more.
Right. Abdullah has 2 more friends who basically, they're like people who missed the first session. This book is like basically 4 sessions of play for me.
Right,
and the 2 friends, they missed the first session.
They're introduced as being retired, but
right.
Still having, I don't know, they still have adventuring chops, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of these characters deserve at least a 5-minute discussion.
Yeah,
let's start with our first perspective character and the heart of the novel, the Ghoul Hunter, Dr. Abdullah Maksud. So he is basically a clericy wizard, a wizardy cleric who is blessed by God. He wears a white caftan that can never be stained, and he is part of an order dedicated to hunting ghoul raisers, which are basically like evil sorcerers or necromancers, the servants of the traitorous angel. And he has magic powers, can cast spells by invoking verses of the sacred chapters. Basically, he quotes the Quran and he pulls out some spell components ranging from a tortoise shell filled with gems, needles inscribed with verses, and all kinds of other really cool
vials
spell
filled with, fragrant, substances.
And then, he blows things up with them, which is just so great.
And this by itself is great, but Abdullah is just the Doctor is just a tremendous character. Because
Doctor Who?
Doctor?
Not
on top
Doctor.
of all of this, he's, by his own admission, fat, old,
cranky,
horny, hungry, frequently lusting after his
prejudice,
his curvaceous, brothel-owning flame, Miri.
He's a bit of a dandy. Like, he just wants to drink his expensive teas.
He likes cardamom tea and almond cakes. But he's so likable. He's uncouth. He's constantly offending his pious assistant Rashid by, cursing and making lewd comments. And he's, even outside the context of Dungeons and Dragons, is just a terrific character. He is so well written and interesting and not your standard hero, but so obviously heroic. He's just tremendous.
He is absolutely for me, the pure embodiment of a good character or a chaotic good character, neutral good character.
And it's
whatever your value of alignment is, which is very low, but whatever.
I would say he's probably, I would align him chaotic good, but maybe neutral good. And now he is, and I think Ahmed has written about this, right, is so many heroes are, actually the daughter of the elven king or, whatever. He's born a street child in Dom Swat. On Dead Donkey Lane.
Lane, that's right.
And he grows up brawling. He doesn't care for books, but eventually he is brought into the order of ghoul hunters and learns to read and appreciate poetry and the more sophisticated things. But he never loses his street roots and, rough and tumble sensibilities. He's a great character. And what's great is that you get this sense for him within the first 5 pages. The way he talks, he mentions all of the things. It's just really tight, efficient character building. You know who he is right away. Yeah.
And we'll get into this as we introduce some more characters. But one of the great things about Dr. Abdullah Makhloud is how he feels towards basically every other character in the novel very well, just sort of based on who he is. To the other party members, to Dom Sawat, which is kind of a character in this novel as well, to the authorities. We haven't talked about there's a shitty caliph here in Dom Sawat and a rebel, the Falcon Prince. But
with mustachios. Gotta have a guy with mustachios.
Oh man, he is just such a good character, and I challenge you, if you have clerics or paladins in your party, the idea of a incredibly good, but maybe, and in fact, fairly pious, but someone who disregards kind of puffed up people of religion as a character is just such a strong idea, because here he is with actual divine powers, and he is so much more concerned with the spirit of, God's, love and compassion and mercy for humanity than all these other characters, and it makes him so angry, and you feel that anger as a reader too.
He's irreverent in the best sense of the word, and it's I want to talk. This reminds me. I did not have a problem with it, and it makes perfect sense to me. But our sort of our call to action at the beginning. I'm wondering if you think that it makes sense, because he hears about a child comes to him, bloody, sent by his old flame, Miriam, right?
Miri.
Right. And the child's family has been murdered by ghouls. So he has to go, and that's what he does. He's a ghoul hunter. But there's no...
Whenever I read ghouls in this, and I know, of course, ghoul is part of a long Arabic fantasy, folk tradition, right? It's an Arabic word. But whenever I read the word ghoul, I hear it said in Charlie Day's voice from Always Sunny, ghouls, goblins.
Ghouls? Son of a bitch. What are you talking about now?
Funny little green ghouls.
Yeah, we've said this a bunch of times, but ghouls in this are exactly what you would imagine them to be. Undead creatures that eat people and are summoned by, necromancers or dark wizards. They're made of... There's such poetry in this, which I think is missing from a lot of Western fantasy. They're made of grave dirt and maggots. When they get killed, they dissolve into that, and everything is sort of
the inside of one is filled with writhing scorpions, scarabs, and cobras. It's
a little hard to put your finger on, but there's a poetry, and there's an embellishment to this book that makes it feel authentic. Anyway, so the Dr. Dooley is sent to investigate these ghouls, but there's no offer of payment, right? There's no carrot on the stick, and this is the only thing I thought that might be unrealistic for a D&D party is he just feels, well, I'm a ghoul hunter, I have to go. This is what I do, and he complains, right? He's like, I wish I could just stay and drink my cardamom tea and enjoy my city of Dom Sawat, but he goes and he answers the call, and I loved this. I thought this was great, but it makes me think about how much harder we have to entice D&D players sometimes to get them to agree to go on the mission, and I think that a good way to... I think that's a good lesson from this is if your players come with well-established characters, then it's easier to throw the hooks at them that they will then take up because they have clear motivations.
And I think here's a great point about this is the characters here have been on many adventures, right? Dr.
Right.
Abdullah Makhloud has slain a giant golden cobra and a one-horned demon and a cyclop or something like that, right? He's had many adventures all over the world, and so he's an established character. And I go back to like Monty Cook's idea of like boiling a character down to one sentence as far as who they are and what they do and what their motivations are. I am a blank who blanks in order to blank, right? Mm-hmm. Dr. Abdullah Maksud is a ghoul hunter of the guild who invokes the name of God to slay the traitorous angels' creatures in order to protect his city, but also so that one day he could have a nice, quiet life, and and finally be with his hot old flame who is a madam, right?
A madam, right.
So and here's why I should say to you as dungeon masters is it's never too late to, at the beginning of your session, right? Even after a couple sessions of play, right? Because players discover who their characters are as they play, right? Have them write down that statement of purpose if they're unfocused about their motivations. Pick them up, and then for that next time you have a break in your game and you're not sure what to do. Oh, this character is a ghoul hunter that wants to protect things. Here's your next thing. You got to go hunt some undead. Perfect motivation. They're off, right?
I think this is something that can be challenging because a lot of adventures, rightfully so, I think, start at first level. I do generally like to start there. But then players, I think, sometimes assume that they have to be novices or brand new. But encourage people, even if they're not, a level 1 adventurer is entirely capable of having had many adventures already. And so encourage them to come to the table with a developed backstory and many battles with, maybe not the most dangerous foes, but under their belt. I think that it encourages them to think of as existing characters with stories of their own, and that's a great thing about this book is that everybody comes into it having some fights or some adventures under their belt.
Right. Well, speaking of novice characters, I think it's time we introduce character number 2, Rasid Bas Rasid, a dervish of the order, clad in turban and blue silk, wielding his flashing forked sword that cleaves good from evil. Right. He enters the story, and though he has had some adventures before, right, he is in many ways an outsider to Dom Swat. And kind of in that, if you did want to make a character who is new, a novice in many ways, though he's a full dervish. Let's talk about Rasid, because here he's kind of the foil to impious, but in a good way, Dr. Abdullah, right? In that he is pious, sometimes in a bad way, and he struggles with that.
Well, I love Rasid too, and he could not be more different than Abdullah. He's young. He's 17 or 18, and he's come directly from the order of the dervishes. He's been instructed to serve with the ghoul hunter.
Now, there's a correct answer to this, Rob. What class do you think Rasid Bas Rasid is?
Oh, I think he's a paladin.
Oh, he's a fucking monk.
Fine. Matt's probably right. Matt's probably right that he's a monk.
Okay, but he basically, this is another great idea for a character, right? Is monks often come from religious orders, and if you want to turn that that asshole paladin on its head, right? Make them a monk, and you'll have a lot of fun. Because yes, he is lightning quick. Leaps with supernatural ability.
Oh, right. That's true.
He can punches a bunch of people all the time.
Yeah, he can slow fall
when he doesn't have his sword.
Yeah,
he's a Kinsai monk or something.
Definitely.
Like that.
No, Matt's right about this.
He has breathing exercises and meditations.
Right. So Rasid is great.
But he plays like a paladin, which is great, which is like, take away that like, oh, I am a super devoted zealot of a religion, decouple it from the paladin class, and you will have a lot more interesting characters.
Rasid is your standard lawful good, but not obnoxious about it. And he clashes with, I mean, he is obnoxious about it,
Sometimes.
but like not in the way that like ruins the story and or the game. But he's a novice. He's new to Dom Sawat. He's new to adventuring. But he's very impressive. He can fight with a sword. He can run for miles. He's not afraid of ghouls. But he blushes whenever a pretty girl comes by, and he doesn't know about the big city, and he's easily embarrassed by Adula's insults and jibes and teasing. And
here are 3 Rashid Bas Rashid Stan character building tips. 1, make a naive character.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of my players always wants to make a character who is like seen it all, right? But naive characters are super fun for both you and your party to role play as. Mm-hmm. Number 2, everyone wants to make a super hot character, and Rashid is very hot, but make a hot shy character.
Yeah, he's a fucking goof. Everybody like. The girls
he's
always
a doofus, but he's so hot.
The girls are looking at him and his fine bone structure and, hard body. And
he works out every day. It shows. But
he has no idea what he's doing.
No game.
He's such a goof. It's really funny.
And he's ashamed of being horny. And there you go. He is a perfect example of an inner conflict in a character that doesn't disrupt the party, right?
Yeah.
Rashid is a law and order type guy. He sort of believes in a lot of things about the religion of the Crescent Moon kingdoms and the authorities of Dom Sawat that someone like Dr. Abdullah Makslood is completely jaded with. However, right, he's able to express those concerns with the story without it ever devolving into them working at opposite ends.
Well, right, he's lawful good. He's a rule follower in the most direct and obvious sense of the word. But while the Caliph is an authority, so too is the doctor. And he's, compelled to obey him. And so even though it makes him frustrated and conflicted, he generally goes along with what the doctor wants to do for the good of the story, the party, for example. And it's not easily done, but he has to make the decision that works in the moment. And that means not being a pain in the ass for no reason, bringing it up later. He's great. If it's not, it'll be clear by the time we get to all the characters. But what's great, of course, about Throne of the Crescent Moon is that all of the characters have obvious flaws that are not, that are both realistic and not, crippling or over, or distracting. They're realistic people, right? Rashid is, take away all of his personal stuff. He's a huge badass. He's incredibly good at fighting and could easily be a special snowflake, obnoxious character. But because he's so internally conflicted and naive and struggles with, basic social interactions.
A genius with the sword.
That's right.
An idiot in the streets.
That's right. That's what I was thinking of with your first clip at the beginning.
Yeah. Man, Dr. Abdullah Makslood is played by your character who has the best quips.
He's very clever. So that's the thing is if you're going to bring a character this is my advice, you don't have to do this. But if you're going to bring a PC to the table that is, hyper optimized, which is fine. You can do that, but do everyone a favor and give them some interesting, funny, potentially troublesome flaws. Give them relatively low charisma or low wisdom and play them that way, right? Play them. You don't have to give them a major flaw, but don't have them be a hyper badass and their flaw is I can't trust anybody. I just too much darkness in my past. Give them something interesting and fun if you're going to bring somebody who's dishing out, massive dice rolls every combat turn.
And I think Rashid is a great example of, think of Saladin Ahmed, who is, I think, talked about how he is not, a super, religious person himself, right? Playing a very religious character or in, the author's case, writing a hyper religious character, right? Or a hyper devout. I think devout is the word I meant to say instead of, you know, the author is not a super devout person, but he has written a very devout character and written them very well, and that is often a challenge.
And I think that this is a good depiction of how people of faith might behave in a fantasy world with actual demons and angels and you know, spells. And I especially love how Rashid responds to it, and I love how Abdullah responds to it, because Abdullah especially knows that that it's real, but also he can do divine magic, and so he's not he doesn't feel compelled to play up the I guess temporal, the worldly parts of it. He's not interested in structures of whatever. I guess
he's not interested in converting or preaching at anyone.
Right.
And if I had, an extra source book for every player I've had who's rolled up a character who just wants to preach the gospel or something at people, it's much more interesting to do a little twist on that, and a cleric who's not interested at preaching people, right?
Right.
How about a monk who's interested in preaching at people?
Right.
Much more interesting. And one thing I want to say, because we got to get to some other characters here, is Abdullah Maksud and Rashid Bas Rashid. What a great example of relationships within the adventuring group. If you haven't done this yet, right? As a fun activity to wrap up the night for your D&D game, right? Draw, your satanic pentagram of 5 points for your 5 players on a big sheet of butcher paper. Have them all write down their names and have them draw a line to the other members of the party and maybe one important NPC about how their character feels or acts towards that person, right? And think about, and this can be something you can do before you even start play, right? The relationship between Dr. Abdullah and Rashid is super great, right? In that they have this master apprenticeship relationship. They both respect each other for their, badassery, right? But they basically disagree on everything else.
Well, and this is a. I guess let's get to our third character, because I think this is a good foundation of mutual respect, right? If you're trying to find a way for your characters to all get along despite differing feelings or opinions, a great foundation of mutual respect is, this person can handle themselves in combat. Every other character in the book is like, oh man, this is a fat, tired, old man. What on earth am I doing walking around with him? But then ghouls will show up and he's
fucking blasted them,
throwing out incantations and, laying down the law and very easily handling his own, despite not looking the part. And this comes up when our next character arrives, our third and, core member of the adventuring party, Zamia.
Yeah. Zamia Bedawi is basically she's our barbarian, right? She is a nomad.
She's clearly a druid.
I completely disagree. Disagree.
What?
Because, so Zamia is a member of the Bedawi tribes people who, are basically the Bedouin of the Empty Kingdom. They're nomadic.
Tribes people, yeah. From the empty lands, empty kingdoms or something?
The empty kingdoms, they're nomadic herders, right? Clan and tribe are very important to them. And, before we get to her, this is such a great example. Dr. Abdullah is such an asshole to Zamia when they first meet, because she is a, savage, uncouth barbarian, right? A Bedawi and not a city dweller like himself. And I'm just like, thank you for having sort of a realistic medieval prejudice instead of I hate elves or something like that.
Instead of tedious, boring racism. The people of Dam Sawat hate the marsh people because they're poor and live in the marshes, and they they don't hate them, but they look down on the desert people because they're poor and live in the desert and don't have the fine, sophisticated manners of a Dam Sawati. Yeah.
They don't read, right? They have different traditions. They have superstitions that the people of the city are above.
And you can tell that these are silly prejudices, but like they're realistic. So if you're trying to build some conflict based on a prejudice or a bigotry, start here. Don't go, ugh, I hate all dwarves and elves. It's just so much more realistic and interesting.
Right. Yeah. Instead, be like, I really hate people who live in cities, right? Or something like that. Or I have no respect for merchants, right?
Right.
They've ripped off after the bank repossessed my father's farm. I hate all who deal in coin and usury. Okay,
right.
Zamia is the protector of the band of the Benulaith Bedawi, a tribe of nomads who were slaughtered by this ghoul Razor, and she's the last one left. A tragic backstory indeed. She has the supernatural power because she is angel-touched, right?
That's right.
We got almost a whole party of not actually divine classes, as I'm going to argue, but who attribute their powers to God.
But realistically,
and she can shapeshift into a magic gold and silver lion that destroys everything.
Realistically, for the setting, everybody believes in sort of like the same faith, the same overall deity. They have different interpretations, but everybody has the same holy scriptures and the same, fear and hatred of servants of the traitorous angel.
But there's also the old gods, the cobra-headed god.
That's true. That's true.
But it's only hinted at, right? It's so far in the ancient past that only like a couple of people even know about it, right?
But generally, I like this. I think this is a realistic depiction of how a medieval people might feel about the divine in general. Everybody has sort of like a shared experience of faith. You can probably imagine that there are some other beliefs out there, but everybody here, draws their power more or less from the similar divine tradition, and despite not being necessarily divine classes. I agree that I don't think Adula is necessarily a cleric. I think you're right that Rashid is not a paladin, and Zamia, despite being angel touched, is not some sort of divine whatever.
Right. But you think she's a druid? You think she's a druid? Why is she a druid? Okay.
Because she shapeshifts into a lion.
But what is the primary function within the party is she is a warrior. She is the party's front line like a barbarian. I say that basically in the thing that never happened is so the party sat down and the dungeon master was like, okay, you want to play a barbarian, but you want to shapeshift? Okay, we'll just reskin when you rage that you actually are in the shape of a lion and you get a natural attack. She's a Path of the Beast turned up to 11 barbarian. In fact, I feel like I need to make a barbarian subclass where your rages are shapeshifts.
There used to be something like that in Pathfinder.
Honestly, no useful skills around smelling and tracking.
Okay, so my interpretation is that she's a druid that is exclusively shapeshift based, that might as well just not have spells. But you're not wrong.
She's that World of Warcraft druid who has never left cat form the entire time. You're like, can we please get some heals? They're like, no, I'm DPS only. God damn it. Can't you just shapeshift out and root a mob for us? Come on.
No, never leaving cat form. Never
leave cat form.
I'm open to your interpretation. I think that would be one way to build Zamia. I like the idea that somebody was like, I'm a druid, but I'm only going to ever fight in cat form, and the rest of the class might as well not exist, which I think highlights a problem with the druid class, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I'm open to your interpretation of Zamia.
I think, yes, maybe she's a 3rd edition character and she doesn't have a high enough wisdom score to cast spells, but nothing prevents her from using her wild shape ability. So she's in fact a worse fighter that can just turn into and she only shapeshifted in one thing. However, her claws are silver, and one of my favorite moments in the book is they fight a demon that none of them can hurt, the man jackal Mawawa, which is just a great And Mawawa speaks in an old-timey, thee and thou, and only refers to himself as Mawawa, the man-jackal, right? And
I think he's meant to be, evoke an ancient Egypt type, very, old civilization and empire. And does he ever make you think, Mawawa, ordinarily a goofy ass name, Mawawa, but he terrifying man jackal. Yeah.
Terrifying man jackal, and if you're looking for inspiration how to run a super creepy or a demon monster and have it speak in a way that distinguishes it as a creature of pure evil, look no further than the sections of the book where Mawawa is speaking into these characters' minds, and talk like this, and your players will be like, oh yeah, that's a demon. Mm-hmm. They sound very different than the blacksmith we were talking to earlier.
Right, yeah.
Mawawa can smell your fear. Kitten.
Be sparing with your these and thous and whilsts and whatnot. Please do not use old time speak in your games.
Right, but when you break it out, bam.
Unless you are trying to really emphasize that a creature is ancient and powerful and possibly, evil and terrifying.
Right.
Be sparing.
Eats the blood and souls of innocent children. So Zamia's claws are silver, and they find out only silver can overcome damage reduction. A very D&D moment there. We have so Zamia is a great character. Also, right? All the characters in this are really young or really old, which creates a fun dichotomy in the party. And I feel like often the characters my players make are in the sweet, acceptable to be cast as a female lead in a movie, right? Age 22 to 36 only.
Zamia is also a goof. She's angry and fierce, but lacking in social graces, so she's frequently flustered and confused. She thinks Racine is super hot and doesn't know what to do about that. And
oh no, I've got the hots for this weird virgin celebrate monk. Just Samia problems.
Bang this incel, and I don't know what to do. It's like he's Volcel. He's
very Volcel.
He's much too powerful to be incel.
Yeah. No, never make incel characters, only Volcel characters.
Only Volcel. But yeah, even though she's a super badass who kills a giant ghoul by herself, or mostly by herself at the very beginning, she's just completely overwhelmed by the city, and again, like everybody else, frequently flustered by Adula's, not giving a shit about her.
Right. Abdullah is such an asshole in a kind way to everyone.
He just, he's so good at, again, he doesn't take shit from anybody. He doesn't respect any social graces unless they're important to him.
Earned.
Yeah, right. And earned.
Or we'll get him killed.
Right. So Zamia's terrific, yeah.
Zamia's terrific, and then we're introduced to our final characters when Zamia needs some healing magic, because Dr. Abdullah Maksud is many things, but he's a cleric who has prepared no healing spells, which I respect. Of course, maybe he's a wizard
but also a cleric, a cleric who's only prepared blasting. No,
I need to write a wizard subclass for Ghoul Hunter that's like a better version of the Theurge.
I think he's a wizard, or maybe some kind of. I mean, he's not a sorcerer. He clearly prepares spells.
That's Dawood. Dawood's a sorcerer,
right? Otherwise, he would be a
he has spell components for every spell, and he has to have his spell components to cast. Right?
He's a wizard.
But of course, his verbal components are quoting the Quran. So.
Right. So he has to go to to his friends.
Dawood and Litas's house, which, again, if you're looking for a relationship between your characters, make one of them, make them spouses. Don't make them, but, encourage, two of your players, if they're looking for ways to be connected to the party, be like, hey, we're spouses, right? Do it.
Yeah.
Dawood is a mage of the Sioux Republic, as is, and his wife is also from the Sioux Republic. They are from two different cultural groups, so they are outlanders to Dom Sawat. They are coded in the novel, to me, if Dom Sawat is Baghdad or Cairo, the Sioux Republic is the Swahili coast, right? And he is common born, but his wife is the niece of a pasha. And he is a powerful magus, and he can basically draw upon his own life energy to heal, do all kinds of things, but it costs him years of his life. His wife, Litas, is an accomplished, perhaps the most accomplished, alchemist in the city, and she can create, healing concoctions, all sorts of interesting things. She has a dagger filled with all kinds of useful alchemical solutions. She's an artificer, basically, under 5th edition rules, in my opinion.
No, yeah, Unfortunately, under 5th edition rules, it'd be hard to build her. She is a alchemist, but there is an alchemist artificer option, so that is your closest bet. But yeah, what do we want to say about Dawood and Litaz? Again, great, rich characters, good for your world or good for your characters to draw inspiration from. I always like the idea of retired adventurers just as a concept, either to seed as NPCs or, always fun, one last job coming out of retirement. Consider that if you're either trying to find someone to include in your game, or if you're thinking about, building a character, have them be old, have them be retired, and maybe they're, one last adventure, series of adventures before finally giving it up for good.
Yeah, I have to say, they are super great characters, and one part from the novel really illustrates how much fun it is in games of Dungeons and Dragons is to make sure that all characters get to have to deal with certain situations. Dawood is a magus, and he is very wise and helpful and powerful. The one thing he is not is trained in court diplomacy, and he is put in a situation where he ends up speaking to the Caliph himself, asking for aid fighting this uber demon summoner. And he totally fails his persuasion check because he is untrained, and it was a great example of that. And so, put your characters who are not good at persuasion, who are not, make your character who is not good at tracking, right?
Right.
Do a little tracking, right? It is fun, even if they fail.
Give your players a chance to succeed at the things that they're good at, but also give them a chance where they're sort of forced to get outside their comfort zone. Make your barbarian speak to the king. Make your wizard try to
break down a door.
Break down a door, right? Or swim across a river.
Yes. Make your wizard do some cardio.
Yeah, make your wizard run. But yeah, not all the time, but it can be a really fun moment. And yeah, Throne of the Crescent Moon does a great job of illustrating that.
One important, maybe not member of the party, but definitely a D&D character is the Falcon Prince, who is seeding a revolution against the unjust caliph's rule in the city. And never has there been a better description of an arcane trickster in a book. He is a magically enhanced rogue, stealing from the rich, giving to the poor.
Yes, the one archetype missing from our canonical party is a rogue, but the Falcon Prince comes and goes to sort of fit that role. He's dashing, he's charismatic, he's flamboyant, he's a little magical. This one's I like the Falcon Prince, but he's a bit more of he doesn't have much time to get fleshed out like the others, so he's a bit more of a cliche, but still fun. I love a brash and flamboyant and over the top, mustachioed rogue.
I think it's a great example of, a clear stereotype to bounce your players against, right? Your players meet, on the one hand, he's stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. On the other hand, maybe he's willing to do whatever it takes, no spoilers for the ending of the novel, to accomplish overthrowing that unjust society and, giving your characters a chance to interact and bounce off and then argue about ooh, do we want to be on this, guy's side or not, right? On the one hand, he's right about the Caliph. On the other hand, he's just so fucking annoying.
Right. He's clearly, like, loves himself. Like, even before, maybe you find out there's more to it. He's just really high on his own supply. He just loves the Falcon Prince. Like, is that somebody you want to associate with?
He calls himself the Falcon Prince.
Right.
Your player, you put a Falcon Prince in your game, your players are going to be like, this guy.
This fucking
As
guy
he's
again.
like, aha! And he, does a double somersault onto the headman's block.
He's an annoying Robin Hood, yeah.
Yeah, you're like, man, I agree with him. Obviously, they shouldn't have executed that child. But did you have to be so fucking extra about it?
Right. Great foil for your party.
Yeah.
I love it. There's all sorts of great examples of this. People who are, okay, you're right about this, but you're a pain in the ass, or you're wrong, but I like you anyway. Like, force your players to, like, make some difficult decisions. Yeah.
Right. And, just having foils like this in these types of situations is why we love urban campaigns, right? It's just a great way to put your characters as fish out of water because there's so many experiences they can have. The example from the novel of Dawood, who's not very good at nobility type things, having to do diplomacy with the caliph's ministers. Litas, who is probably the least religious of a very religious characters, having an encounter with the young scholars. Or Rashid, who's the law and order guy, having to, confront the Falcon Prince, right? It's a great example of this stuff.
So speaking of urban campaigns, let's talk about the setting. What do we want to say about the Crescent Moon Kingdoms, about Dam Sawat? This is, I think, a great example of minimalist world building done fantastically well. You do not have to have a ton of lengthy exposition to get a beautiful, wonderful idea of what it's like to live in and adventure in Dam Sawat.
Yes. We get a sense of, the different neighborhoods and quarters and the crowdedness of the streets, right? I feel like we often forget in our medieval, in our quasi-Forgotten Realms, Waterdeeps, and Neverwinters, that how fucking crowded and crazy medieval cities were.
Sure, and also that you're constantly having to dodge shit and piss. That's important to, important to remember that there's not in most, even in the best cities, your Romes, your Istanbuls, the ones that were clean-ish. People still generally had chamber pots and there were animals walking through the streets. And even if somebody was cleaning it sometimes, you would be it was dirty and smelly and crowded and kind of crazy and not well organized. And it's
definitely don't lay out your medieval cities like a Roman fort, right? Take a look at a map of medieval Toledo or Paris and you're like, am I going insane? Did a drunk 5-year-old finger paint
the
map of this city?
Yeah. And, I love Waterdeep. I run a campaign in it, but you look at the map and it's extremely grid-based. It does not look like how a medieval city might have popped up.
So I love the broader world and, the importance of going outside of, Western Europe for setting things. There might be a Western Europe analog. I think I have in my notes, Dr. Maxlou talks about the Warlands where there are werewolves. I thought that might be a reference to a Europe-like place. I don't know, like that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter at all.
Right.
Every place that matters, Abyssine, the Sioux Republics, and Rugal Bay are very much inspired by, Southwest Asia, East Africa, or I don't know, I sort of got a Turkish feeling from Rugal Bay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think
that
was
listed on it.
The implication. Yeah. And you could easily see a character coming from this far west, a white person, and being a part of the adventuring party, but it would be sort of like an inversion of somebody from Karatur coming and being a part of your adventuring party in Forgotten Realms, and much more interesting to me than the inverse. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and so here's a great thing about history, right? Is it important when the caliphs took power in Damswat? No. How long have people been worshiping God and not the evil gods of Kim, which are, have a bit of an ancient Egypt feel to them, or ancient Sumer feel? I don't know. It doesn't matter. But we get the sense that, this place has a real history.
Yeah, and when and this is, I think, realistic when a character talks about it, even an educated character like Adula or Dawood, they don't know exactly how long anything has been happening. They don't know how long the caliphs exactly have been in charge or when the Empire of Kem was, But they, they'll give you context, but you don't need to know exactly 1,075 years ago the Empire of whatever collapsed and the caliphs took over. You might want to know, but you don't. Your NPCs and characters don't need to have precise dates to have a realistic and functional world.
Let's drill down a little bit from big picture stuff to details. I think this is a great example. Magic in a fantasy world, right?
Yes.
So the fantasy world feels recognizably medieval, so that, people are like, oh, there's a city, there's commoners, there's merchants, there's nobles, right? There's farmlands outside the city. But how would it be different with magic? There's a lot of fun, common spells that people interact with, but it's not like, oh, wow, there's a wizard, floating by on his giant sky chariot.
Right. And this is important for you to establish when you're doing world building. Is it a high magic world where
wizards float by on their sky
chariots? Or is it, a low mid magic world where everybody or a lot of people has a little magic? They can do a charm or a spell, or there's folk healers like around the city, or there's hedge wizards.
There's alchemists and magi. Yeah. The city uses expensive wafting spells to take the fumes of the tannery district away from the rich parts of towns and funnel them over the poor scholars' quarter.
And I like this, and this is something I've done in my own world building, but like there's an implication that the restriction on powerful magic is often cost. Early on, when the Falcon Prince is making his appearance, he's able to be seen and heard from far away because he's using an appearance spell. And I think it's Rashid or Adula comments that only the Caliph can normally afford those. You get a sense that if you're rich, you can do very powerful magic and afford to hire somebody who can. But ordinary people have got to make do with the basics.
Yeah. Why doesn't, everyone hire, a spell that, gives them fresh water every day? Well, that's costs expensive. 75 gold money, worth of fucking diamonds. A laborer can't even make that in a lifetime of work.
That's right. So, maybe they can afford a simple charm or, a low-level spell every now and then, but that's it,
Yeah. And maybe only the middle or upper classes. Yeah. The appearance spell that makes everyone, receptive to the Falcon Prince's words, the wafting spells, the scrivening spell to copy a text quickly were all really great examples of fun, low-level magic that you might find in a fantastical city.
And I love Adula's magic especially because it strikes such a good balance. Whenever somebody's building a magic system, you're like, well, why doesn't this person just do all the magic they want to do all the time? And if it's not well built, you're like, these are some artificial restrictions. But Adula needs to have the energy. He needs to have the materials. He needs to have the knowledge, right? Right. So he's
got to pronounce it even goes into detail and say he has to pronounce the scriptures like loudly and in the right voice. If he coughs in the middle, it ain't gonna work. Sorry, right. God ain't gonna invoke something unless you say it right.
He's not listening. And I think this makes it feel realistic. You never ask, well, why doesn't Adula just blow up more ghouls with another invocation? It's like, well, he's only got one in his bag. He's tired, and he's got a lot of tools. But you never wonder, like, well, why doesn't he just keep casting spells?
Yeah,
it's a very realistic and grounded type of magic.
If your player has a wizard or a divinish wizard or a cleric, they can go no better than looking at the. I very much like the idea that, divine magic is a little bit different than arcane magic, and that when Dr. Abdullah Maksud, invokes a spell, right? He doesn't say something in fake Latin, right? He throws his he throws the 3 jewels into the ghoul and invokes, God is the lightning that strikes thrice. And then, a bolt of lightning shoots out, right?
Right. And I, knowing what's sort of like, to me, I'm imagining this said in Arabic, and it sounds like, a beautiful reading from the Quran, but it's written in English. You don't have to, write out some fakish sounding, Latin or whatever. Just, have them say something stilted or, ancient sounding in English, and that's, God is the lightning that strikes thrice, or, thus always to the evil ones. That's plenty,
Honestly, if you want to up your role play fun in combat as a divine spellcaster, take a look at this example. Write down, 10 or so basic invocations, right? And pull them out when you cast a spell. Your table will love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was also a bunch of cool devices. We talked about expensive spell components, but things that I'm going to drop into my game, like the Powder of the Panther, which glows but does not burn, or Dazzle Glass, like an enchanted mirror that you flash at someone and it stuns them, right?
Yeah.
Super cool shit.
There's Gem Thread and all of these other just ever so slightly magical touches, so you're in a fantasy world, but it's not overwhelming. Things like the caftan that can't get dirty. I love these little touches, right? Little things to make sure that people know that they're in a fantasy world, but that don't overwhelm it or change it too much.
The caftan that doesn't get dirty is like one of the things that I feel like D&D often forgets to build into its classes. They've done it a couple times with some of the classes, but it's something that you should give your players or encourage them to come up with that, marks a divine character, a cleric or a paladin as chosen by God. They have a caftan that never gets dirty, right? Whenever they speak a verse from their deity's sacred scriptures, right? There's a slight ringing in the air.
Right, and it could be something like their holy symbol never tarnishes, or their I don't know, their gauntlets ring with the slightest tone of a bell. It's give them something that doesn't matter, or necessarily has any mechanical effect, but that is a clear indicator of their class or station. Those are interesting touches.
It's cool, and it's flavorful, and your players will love you for it if you can suggest something like this for them. All right, we've talked for a long time about Throne of the Crescent Moon. I think before we go, we should, what are some of our final takeaways for Dungeon Masters about this book? Any random bits or encouragements?
I could talk about this book all day. It is one of my favorites. I just think that it is... I think I've said it all, but it's just such a good example of a well-told story. The pacing is just about perfect. It's never really boring. It's not too long. I think really what I'm most impressed by is that fantasy doesn't always lend itself to rich and interesting characters. And I don't suppose that this is subtle. If this were made into a movie, I don't imagine that anyone would be nominated for an Oscar. But they're also memorable and interesting and unique. And that, I think, is what you should go to for inspiration, either as a DM or as a player. There's a bunch of random people who are also just so rich and interesting. The tea merchant at the beginning.
The tea merchant.
What is it? Sideways somebody.
Yes.
the stable master who's wealthy, but like his spine is curved, like almost at parallel to the ground. There's Miri herself is a great character. Like these are great. Like if you just steal these for your NPCs.
Axe knows her guard.
All of these are basically NPCs, but just so interesting. Give your NPCs like one super unique twist, you know, so your players remember them. It's this I think is just a great place to go for character ideas and inspiration. Yeah, that's my, I think, biggest takeaway.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's super difficult with I think my final takeaway in the tradition of, you know, fantasy has been rooted so long in the tropes of Western Europe and of racism, right? As we talked, right? To be frank, it's refreshing to be reminded that if the right people are given the opportunity, right, to write a fantasy story that's not, it doesn't necessarily have to be so, right? Because all people have mythology and stories, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
Any other random takeaways, things you want to bring up that we didn't get to? I love that once Dr. Max Lud is gathering information and he ends up getting high and smoking weed, which is a super player character thing to do.
Yeah, I love. Nothing I think that stands out. But I love the depiction of magic. I love the depiction of. It is so clearly that we were dealing with D&D character classes, but it doesn't. They fit so nicely into the story that it doesn't feel goofy, you know? It doesn't feel forced.
I'm sad that we will probably never get a sequel, but as Rob said, you know, this is such a good book as a standalone. I did some research on what we're missing out, and you know, Saladin Ahmed did write a short story about one of the characters that was going to be introduced in the sequel, a female dervish cast out by the Order.
Ooh.
And he had mentioned that there was going to be a super powerful djinn, which was
that's right. The djinn are mentioned. But they don't appear.
Right. There are so many cool monsters. Just, you know, you will read this book as a dungeon master and write down 10 things for monsters to deploy in your next stuff.
That was maybe the one thing I was going to mention too, is that magic items, monsters, again, just a great place to go for ideas for things that are going to show up in a D&D campaign. The monsters are so cool, so interesting, and just they fit nicely into the world. It's good stuff.
I think maybe the best way to leave us is with the words of the author himself writing about fantasy, if I could
absolutely
quote, right. Writing about, you know, the idea of fantasy and our world, right? Just a fun, great little essay blog post that Ahmed did a couple of years ago that has always stuck with me. He concludes, right? Should we, or do we choose to believe in better fantasies? The X-Men tell us that people from all walks of life who know what it is to be scorned can work together to help the oppressed. Star Wars tells us that even the weak can resist empire and that the worst among us can be redeemed through love and sacrifice. There are worse lies to live by. The question is not whether we should believe in fantasy. All of us do. The question is which fantasies we choose to believe in. My advice to you, choose carefully, choose wisely.
Beautiful. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great week. Write us at dmofnone@gmail.com. Add us on Twitter. We'll be back. Yeah, stay healthy, stay safe.
God's balls!
God's balls, keep rolling them dice.